Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Top 10 Movies of 2015. In this video, I will count down my favorite films that came out in 2015. So these films are just my personal favorites, the films I thought were the best this year. I haven't seen every movie released this year, but I tried to see all the films everyone was talking about, but I haven't seen them all. There were a few films like Creed and The Kingsman, which I did not see, although I have seen films like The Revenant, Sicario, and Ex Machina. I simply didn't like them as much as the critics seemed to, so they didn't quite make my lists. So I'll start off this video with my pick for the worst movie of 2015. Now, I'm not a film critic, so fortunately I'm not forced to sit through a lot of bad movies, so I tend to avoid movies that either look really bad to me, such as Hot Pursuit, Alvin and the Chipmunks, and 50 Shades of Grey, or movies that all the critics warned me suck, like Minions, Pixels, and The Fantastic Four. So I haven't seen enough bad movies to make a list. So I just have a singular pick, which probably isn't as bad as what you'd find on a typical worst list, but it's the worst that I've seen all year, as the critics failed me here, as it got mixed reviews, even getting 50% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So my pick for the worst movie of 2015 is San Andreas. Good God, this movie was horrible. I suppose the special effects were dazzling, but that's not enough to save this movie. This movie was jam-packed with disaster movie cliches, two-dimensional characters, flat acting, and absurd and ridiculous scenarios. There's a scene at the end of the film that had me laughing hysterically when it was meant to be taken seriously. It was that bad. I'm not one to typically laugh at horrible movies, but this scene was so cheesy I couldn't even believe it. So next, I'll give my pick for most overrated movie of 2015. Now, this movie wasn't bad per se, but it really wasn't good either. However, all the critics said that it was. This movie got 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Comedy Film, when it was really not good. So my pick for most overrated movie of 2015 is Spy. This movie did have me chuckling in a few spots, so it didn't suck, but overall, it was just cliched and devoid of originality, and some of the jokes there were just cringeworthy. It had this one character, this Italian guy, who wasn't the least bit funny. He was actually rather annoying, and some of the jokes were so bad I still cringe whenever I think about them. So this movie doesn't deserve to be nominated for anything. It's a stereotypical slapstick comedy that offers nothing new and should be forgotten. If you want to watch an actual funny spy spoof movie, watch Johnny English or Austin Powers. Both movies were far superior. So now I'll move on to my favorite movies of 2015, and I'll start off with some honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10 list, but were still great movies worth mentioning. First honorable mention is Carol, a great period drama about a lesbian couple in the 1950s and the discrimination and issues that they had to face in that time period, which featured an amazing performance by Cate Blanchett. Next honorable mention is Steve Jobs, a great dialogue-driven drama that takes place in 3 different events right before Steve Jobs is about to announce a new product, and it manages to tell a heartfelt story with these 3 moments in time that was beautifully acted and paid off better than I thought it would. And the last honorable mention is The Martian. I refused to see this movie for the longest time because it looked like another Gravity, which I did not like that movie. However, this movie was actually much better than I thought it would be. It manages to get me invested in the characters and kept me on the edge of my seat the whole time. Definitely worth a watch. So now let me get into my top 10 favorite movies of 2015, starting with my number 10, The Big Short. This film was about the very serious and complicated financial crash of 2008, and it managed to tell it in a very lighthearted and tongue-in-cheek way. I felt the way it blended drama and comedy was perfect, and had a way keeping you invested and interested in material that should have been dry and boring. There were great performances all around. Christian Bale, Ryan Gosling, Brad Pitt were among, they're all great in this film. But for me, the breakout performance was Steve Carell, who did a phenomenal job in this film and got me really invested in his character. Overall, a really great film. Number 9 is Mad Max Fury Road. This movie was a solid action movie. When I was told that this film had a very simple plot about some people just going for a ride, I didn't think I'd like it because I prefer complicated plots, but this managed to keep me involved and on the edge of my seat the whole time. It painted a real believable picture of a post-apocalyptic future, and the characters were interesting enough to keep you invested in the mind-blowing action sequences, which were really a sight to behold. It was definitely one of the best action films to come out in a long time. Number 8 is Mission Impossible Rogue Nation. I wasn't expecting much of this film as I haven't really liked a Mission Impossible movie since the first one, but this one finally managed to capture the greatness of the original. As in any Mission Impossible movie, you get a lot of impressive stunts and great action sequences. However, this film had what the other sequels lacked, an interesting plot, as the IMF team were faced with their greatest adversary yet, a shadow force that seemed virtually unstoppable. Plus, they introduced an amazing female British agent played wonderfully by Rebecca Ferguson, who you never quite were sure which side she was on, but the chemistry between her and Tom Cruise was amazing. Definitely a noteworthy film. Number 7 is Spotlight. Now, I've majored in media studies and also consider myself a student of the media, so I tend to like films about the media, and most, such as one of my all-time favorites, The Insider, displays the negatives about the media. This film explores its positive, as an all-star cast including Michael Keaton, Mark Ruffalo, Liev Schreiber tell a story about a group of newspaper reporters uncovering a conspiracy to cover up the vast amounts of child abuse being committed by priests in the Catholic Church. This movie was a showcase of great acting as it told an important and gripping story that was really captivating. Number 6 is Bridge of Spies, a great Steven Spielberg movie starring Tom Hanks. It may sound a bit cliche, but it's still really good. This is more of a slow-paced dialogue story than it is an action movie, as it deals with a lawyer being recruited by the US government to facilitate a prisoner exchange with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And it was a really captivating movie. Even though it was slow, it had great moments of suspense and kept me invested the whole time. It was a great movie that really captured the culture and feel of that time and told a story of a man willing to risk it all to stick to his principles, and it worked really well. Number 5 is Star Wars The Force Awakens. Now, some people may have gotten the false impression from my review that I didn't like this movie because I talk a little bit about its flaws, but don't be fooled, I really enjoyed this movie. It was definitely a really fun time that featured some well-developed and interesting characters that had me invested throughout, none the least being a roly ball thingy. It had one of the best villains ever put to screen, in my opinion, as I feel the best villains are those that are really well developed and really well rounded, and that you can understand their motivations, and they aren't just evil for the sake of being evil, and I think they succeeded in spades with Kylo Ren. All the film's action sequences were tense and only worked to serve the story more and get you more invested, and the comedy was blended better than any other Star Wars movies has done before it. So this was definitely one of the greatest movies of 2015. Number 4 is Inside Out. Now, I typically don't go all goo-goo for Pixar movies. However, I honestly feel this is one of their best films, if not the best Pixar film ever done. It managed to take a very simple story of a young girl being upset about having to move halfway across the country and turned it into a fascinating adventure that was not only funny but got you emotionally invested in the film as well. At the end of the film, I was trying really hard to hide the fact that I was bawling my eyes out, and I'm typically not one to cry in movies. This movie managed to apply to adults just as much as children, with its cerebral storyline of understanding one's emotions that can apply to anyone regardless of age, while having a fun, funny surface story that kids could really enjoy. And I typically don't like family movies, but this one is truly an accomplishment. Number 3 is The Hunger Games: The Mockingjay Part 2. In my opinion, this is the most underrated film of 2015. I think the critics were far too harsh on it, as I was sick to death of hearing them complain about how The Mockingjay was split into 2 films. Yes, it's a marketing gimmick. I get it. Can we move on now, please? Also, the fact that it was split into 2 films certainly affected the quality of the first film, but I don't believe it affected the quality of this film, which I personally thought was amazing. It was by far my favorite Hunger Games film, as I felt Catching Fire was a bit overrated and just a rehash of the first one, where this film did a Hunger Games style movie, but in the context of a final battle that actually mattered. The film managed to pull off a very strong level of tension and uneasiness throughout the film that was very effective, even through its slow pace, which I felt worked beautifully for the film. And the ending of the film was amazing, as it completely subverted expectations and went against the grain of what you'd expect to see in a typical action-adventure film. I felt the decisions it made were bold and sorely underappreciated. Number 2 is a film I seriously considered for my top slot, and had it been another year, it most likely would have taken my top slot, as I felt it was an outstanding film, and that is The Hateful Eight. Now, I used to consider myself a huge Quentin Tarantino fan in the 90s, but dropped off him a little bit in the 2000s. Although he did recently come back with a couple of solid films in Inglourious Basterds and Django Unchained. To me, The Hateful Eight takes him back to the greatness he displayed with Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. In fact, I have to say, The Hateful Eight is my 3rd favorite Tarantino film behind those 2. This film is very reminiscent of Reservoir Dogs, in fact, as it's about a group of people locked together in the room trying to figure out who isn't who they appear to be, and it also had Tim Roth and Michael Madsen. The acting in this film is just amazing, and as always, Tarantino is the master of dialogue. I am very impressed by films that are mostly dialogue driven and still manage to tell a highly suspenseful and exciting film without resorting to gimmicks such as artsy cinematography, over-the-top action sequences, or a bunch of CGI. The Hateful Eight is a classic murder mystery set in the genre of a Western with a Tarantino twist, and has all the classic beats you'd expect to see in a Tarantino film. I've heard others complain they didn't like the second half of the film and felt it was too disconnected, and I could not possibly disagree more, as it featured some of the great non-linear storytelling you'd expect to see from Tarantino, and I thought it worked wonderfully well. There was never a single second in this film where I was bored. I was so engrossed in this movie the whole time. When it ended and I looked at the time and saw that 3 hours had passed, I was shocked. It did not seem that long at all, and I could have watched more of it. It was a truly impressive film. And my number 1 favorite film of 2015 is a film I cannot say enough good things about. It was the best movie I have seen in a long time, and has it surely earned a spot in my top 50 favorite movies of all time, as I feel it is an absolute masterpiece, and that is Room. I'll be completely honest, I did not think I'd like this film. I reluctantly watched it because all the critics were raving about it, so I thought I should at least give it a shot, but I was expecting this film to be a typical boring Oscar bait film like Boyhood that I'd have to admit is technically good even though I didn't really enjoy it, and that's not at all what I got. You know how I said in Inside Out I was bawling my eyes out at the end? And I was trying to hide it. Well, in this film, I was constantly bawling my eyes out. And again, I'm not typically the one to cry in movies. In fact, I'd say if you see this movie and you don't cry at least once, you have no soul. This was such an effective movie that portrayed the love a mother has for her 5-year-old son so much more effectively than I've ever seen in any other movie. Now, this is the type of movie where the less I say about what it's about, the better. Because it's better to come into this movie fresh without knowing anything. In fact, I'd even say not to watch the trailer, as it gives far too much away, and I was glad that I hadn't seen it before watching this film. Suffice to say, it's about a 5-year-old boy and his mother who have been trapped in a single room his entire life, and all he has ever known is this room, and he doesn't doesn't even know that the world exists beyond it, which is such a fascinating concept that's really taken to its full potential in this film. What I love about this film is that it's told through the eyes of a normal, cheerful 5-year-old boy. So in situations that adults would find dark and depressing, it portrays them with a childlike wonder, and it's amazing how well this is pulled off. I also love how this film so expertly breaks typical movie conventions, such as there's this scene that is the most tense and suspenseful scene I've seen in a while, but instead of playing it as tense with like typical suspenseful music, dun 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 dun, it plays it light with the childlike wonder as it's seen through the 5-year-old's character's eyes, and this doesn't diminish the suspense at all, and it just makes it so much more powerful. Also, this film has a moment that happens about the halfway mark of the movie that most films would have at the very end and then be like, well, it's anticlimactic to show anymore after this, which is an argument I often disagree with because I like having full closures in my film. Anyway, this happens at the halfway mark, and the second half of the film is just as powerful, if not more so, and it doesn't feel disjointed or out of place at all. It fits perfectly, even though essentially the entire nature of the film changed. And the fact that this film pulled it off so well is really something to admire. However, I do feel I need to talk about this film's flaws, and there's none. This film has no flaws. It's a near perfect movie in my opinion. It's still very early, and I have to let this film sink in and sit with me for a little bit, and I have to see it several more times, which I can't wait to do. But this very well may be my favorite movie of the decade, let alone the year. If this movie doesn't win every possible Oscar it can, I'm going to think the Oscars are a bigger joke than I already do. So saying Room is a must-watch is a bit of an understatement, and it is by far my #1 favorite movie of 2015. So that's it for my top 10 movies of 2015. Be sure to check out my channel for other film videos, including my Breaking Convention series where I talk about unpopular opinions I have on film, and my top 50 movie series, as well as a whole slew of videos on TV shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, and more. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.